everybody. So what we're going to talk about today is going down this cybersecurity journey where a lot of stuff has changed in the past, I don't know, maybe 5 years. And we're going to even do a little thought exercise on that in just a second. So while we get this ready, I call this like surviving the cybersecurity wilderness, because if you've been like me, you feel like you really are surviving it. It's not easy going on this journey. The world is much different today than it has been in the past, I don't know, even 5 or 6 years ago. And I get to give talks very similar to this all the time, all across the country, even internationally, and I see a unifying thing, which is small and mid-sized businesses, they actually care now too. They understand. And I understand not all of you guys come from small or mid-sized, but like we're all unifying over like this is a big deal. And then you even see what's happening at the federal level, like what's happening with President Biden signing an executive order, and cybersecurity is a huge piece of all that right after the big SolarWinds incident that happened. We've been caught in the crosshairs of all of this, for sure. So the government's picking up on this, we're all picking up on this, and so I want to talk a little bit about like what happened, and why it's happening, and what you can do about it, so that you can actually come away with this with something actionable and arm yourself with. So let's see if I can get this little guy going here. I'm pushing the button. It is not working. Maybe if I come down, I don't mind coming down. Will it cause feedback if I come down?
I think it's working.
It's working? There we go. Okay, cool. So I live in Tampa, Florida is where I live, and used to be an educator, and it took me forever to learn that I can still be an educator without being an educator. I got really burned out of like teaching, but I moved around in some other roles, spent some time at a bank, learned a lot at the bank, and even had the opportunity to get elected into a leadership role in the Financial Services ISAC, which is basically a big like threat intelligence sharing organization, and worked with about 4,000 banks and credit unions. That ended up exposing me to the Department of Homeland Security, some groups in the FBI, and got to do some really cool work in sharing automated intelligence. So if you guys ever want to nerd out over like threat intel and threat intel sharing, that's a lot of fun, but I do require beers for that. And then I kind of switched, and I don't know if I'm moving in the wrong place or what, but I kind of switched from that, and I ended up deciding that I was going to leave a 145-year-old bank in a nice corner office where everything is comfortable and safe, and I'm not going anywhere, my job's not going anywhere, to go create a company of which we had 1 month of funding and no one wanted to give us money. They all thought we were stupid, they all thought we had no street cred, which they were right on both of those, and they all said it would fail. And we did it anyway, and I can give you the longer story on why I decided to make that journey and that change in life. But it was a great opportunity for me long-term just to see what this world of like being an entrepreneur is like. And I will not lie to you, it's ridiculously hard. But we grew it over 4 years and sold it just about a year ago in December to ConnectWise for about 80 million is the public number. So if you would have told me like 2 or 3 years ago that was gonna happen, let alone 5 years ago before we started Perch, never in my wildest imagination would I believe that that could happen. And it's neat seeing that whole journey, and it taught me so much. And so I'm not going to talk too much about that part. I'm going to talk much more just about security. But I do run a YouTube channel. You guys are welcome to check that out if you want to see. I talk a lot about like cryptocurrency because I think that's fun, and technology and where it all kind of intersects. Let me push the little button again. So let's talk about this for a minute. Let's talk about how the past few years have gone for us so we can really assess the rest of what I want to share with you today, because I think that would be much more helpful. So let's start with this. One of the best ways to understand what the results of a breach look like are to understand what the damages are. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, and I'm going to share this with you to get started. So IBM and Ponemon commission a study every single year. I always jump into this. This is actually like 2 months old, so it's really, really fresh. And this year's data is showing it's about $180 a record is the overall cost of a breach. And keep in mind, in today's day and age, a record is not just like a social security number, it's not just a credit card number. Records in today's era of state notification laws are names, addresses, emails, phones, like all of these different things are records. So if you want to have some idea of like what a breach would cost your organization, take the number of records you have, and that might be a fun thought exercise if you don't even know how many records you have. You definitely might want to kind of figure that part out, and multiply it by 180. That's going to give you an average cost. The other thing they see in that study is it's about $2.98 million, just shy of $3 million from a ransomware attack, is typically what it costs a company 500 employees and below. So what if you're even larger? Well, it's higher. And that might shock you, like why does it cost so much? Well, we do know ransomware today is much different than the era of olden days. There's a lot of reasons it's different. One of the reasons is most of the threat actors, before they actually push ransomware to your machines, they already know everything about you. So they already know your accounts receivable. They've already looked at all of your accounts because they have full access to your network, and they typically take about 10%. Usually what they charge for the ransom is about 10% of your annual revenue. And if they can't get your AP, what they'll do instead is they'll just jump on ZoomInfo, Dun & Bradstreet, one of those, and get some idea of what your average revenue is, because they want to have an accurate number. So it's that, but it's more to it than that. It's all the reputation damage. In my experience, I've worked with a whole bunch of companies that have gone through a systemic ransomware event. And what I see, now I can't point to a study on this, but what I see oftentimes is about 20% of your client base is gone. So that's the other thing to really think about, is what's the impact when my organization goes through a ransomware breach and I have all my third parties and all my clients saying, what happened, when are you coming back online? And you have to, under state notification laws, tell them exactly what happened, when it happened, how it happened within a certain time frame, and we typically see about 20% attrition. So the reputational damage is something that we're still trying to measure in this industry, but we know it's significant. So now we have some like starting point, but there's one other, and I don't think I have a slide for you on this, but does anyone know the average days of complete downtime from a ransomware attack? Anyone want to guess in days how many that is? 8, I heard. Anyone else want to?
14.
Hazard guess. 14? You guys are surprisingly accurate. I asked this last night in Dallas, and I got like 150 was the number. And I'm like, thank God it's not 150. Like, yes, that probably happens, but rarely. Yeah, so whoever said 14, it's about 16 days. It's the average complete downtime. And we know it's systemically longer than that with some systems being out. That's another way to measure. What's your annual revenue, your monthly revenue, then divide that to get your daily, just on average, multiply that by 16, and now you have just like revenue loss damages on top, right? So there's a couple of different ways you can go about measuring why this matters. And what I'm going to do is, does anyone recognize this? Nintendo. What's the game? Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Okay, so I am in a collective group of nerds. Thank you very much. Okay, so I grew up super poor, and I was an Atari 2600 family in the era of a Nintendo Entertainment System. We just couldn't afford it. And so I would go to my friend's house to play this all the time, like always going over there. And this, I would say, is probably one of the top 10 video games of all time. Do you want to agree with me? If you don't, I'll fight you over it. This game is fun. And it's not like Minecraft. Like, I play tons of Minecraft with my kids. It's a lot of fun. But Minecraft, like, you die, no big deal. You just respawn. Life is normal. Like, in the Nintendo generation, you guys remember this? Like, when you die and it's game over, it's game over. You start over from the beginning, at least until Game Genie came out and like changed everything. So I know I'm like delving deep into like nerd stuff, right? But here's the reason I love this game is it was hard and it was rewarding and it was fun, and I could mash my way all the way through the game until I got to Iron Mike. And this dude, like one punch from him, and you're done. Like that's literally all it took from you. One punch and you're out. And you're like, how the heck am I? And by the way, if you see him today, that dude is still ripped. Like I'm still convinced like one punch would totally send me down, no doubt. And so this game was hard. And here's what I've learned. I don't know if you guys remember Nintendo Power magazines, but I remember going to the store and buying those, and they came out with one for Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, and they showed how to beat him. And it's a pattern. And there's only one way to beat him. There's only one pattern to beat him. You cannot button mash, you cannot guess, you must follow the pattern. And I think cybersecurity is a lot like that. Sometimes we feel like we're button mashing, we're chucking vendors at problems, we're hoping some amount of money fixes it, right? The reality is that doesn't fix security. Just like there's a blueprint to beat Iron Mike, there's blueprints in security. We're going to talk about a little bit of that today. And the encouragement for you would be this. You might feel like Mac in the fight, like when you're thinking about how the heck am I supposed to beat a very well-resourced, organized crime group running out of Ukraine or Russia, which I'll show you one of those guys here in a minute. How the heck am I supposed to handle that situation, right? Like you're like Mac, you're undersized, you don't have the length, you don't have the speed, you don't have the power, but just like following the pattern and getting through to the TKO and Mike, you can do the same thing. I'm not talking like knocking out a bad guy. Oh, I would love to do that one day. Like that would be, like when I'm elected dictator, that's gonna be a lot of fun. And I'm going to show you my #1 punchable face here in a minute. I don't know if you guys see Reddit's punchable faces, but I'm going to show you my #1 punchable face here in a minute. So let's talk about this. I think one of the challenges that we have is, and I don't think this is you guys as much, but oftentimes clients think that I talk to, oh, look, I'm good. I haven't been hit by anything yet. I'm too small for anyone to care about. No one cares about my business. Nobody knows who we are. I'm too small to matter. All of those kinds of things. So I hear that a lot. And I want to talk about that a little bit more because I think it's kind of important. I have worked with a lot of organizations who've gone through a breach. One thing I didn't say is who I work for. So I work for ConnectWise. We're probably the biggest cybersecurity company you've never heard of. We primarily work with IT providers, just like Chelsea and team. And we have a team of about 150 security analysts. By the end of the year, we should be closer to 180. We do everything from tier 1, like security stuff, all the way to tier 3, threat hunting, threat research, some really, really cool stuff. We've spent about $250 million over the past 2 years just growing cybersecurity talent. So we're really quite large. And one of the things that comes out of that is we work with a whole bunch of clients. And one of the intakes that we get for a lot of clients is those that are in the middle of a breach or have just come out of it. And so I ask them a lot of questions. And I love to know from their perspective, what do you think happened? What's your experience? What's your lessons learned? And I remember talking with a client who's an insurance firm. And he had an interesting story. He said, here's my story. He said, we had ransomware everywhere, but he said, here's my story. I go home on Friday. Everything's great. Have a great Friday, great evening, great Saturday, great Sunday. And then Sunday night, they start getting calls. And people are like, hey, yo, my email, can't get to it. And my VPN's not working. He's like, well, let me find out. So he tries to VPN and nothing works. He's like, yeah, sure enough, we probably have an internet outage. So he drives into the local office and there's ransomware everywhere. And he's like, and that changed the game for us. It cost us over $2 million to recover. We did pay the ransom, and it was a horrible, horrible experience. And here's the thing. He said, in the forensic aftermath, we learned that the threat actor was in our network for 30 days. So he's like, I had 30 days by which I could have done something, and I didn't. I didn't know. So here's kind of my thoughts on this. Look at this image right here. I share this in almost every time I talk. Look at this image. What do you see? You guys give me some adjectives or descriptors of what you see here. Just yell them out.
An incomplete sentence.
Incomplete picture or sentence, intentionally. What else do you see? Dark. Last night someone said a sunny day, and I was like, what? And she was like, well, there's like light reflecting off that mist. I'm like, okay, all right.
It's a warning tool.
What was that?
A warning tool.
A warning tool? Okay.
It's a lighthouse.
Yeah, it's a lighthouse. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's made to be a warning tool. Yes. What else do you see? What was that?
Part of the picture.
Yeah, we see part of the picture, which is intentional. I'll give you the rest here in a second. Right? And we see maybe kind of rainy, maybe kind of cloudy, kind of gloomy day. Let me show you the rest of the picture. You're like, oh no. No, we missed it. There's the rest of the picture. Ooh, we got there. Isn't that drastically different than what I just showed you? Like way, way different. I'm sure this lighthouse can withstand the wave. I'm sure it's not its first. But my reaction to this image is limited by my visibility. And in security, it is always the same way for organizations that go through one of these major breaches. It's just a visibility problem. And they'll say things like, I had no idea that was happening. I had no idea this was about to occur. I don't know if you guys remember all the attacks that happened on the July 4th weekend this year with a big company called CISO. I lost a whole week of vacation on that one. Had nothing to do with my company, but we had a lot of our clients that were involved in that, and that sucks. We were really, literally getting ready to light off fireworks, all that, we were getting everything ready, and I get the call. There goes a whole week for me. It's always at the worst times. It's always at the times you expect the least. There is no doubt those threat actors decided to pull the trigger on that particular attack because it was July 4th weekend. 100%, they knew what they were doing. They knew that would be the most opportune time. And so it's kind of like that, right? I love this example. The other example I want to give is this right here. So oftentimes we think that we live in a great neighborhood, everything's okay, right? I know my neighbors, I've been here forever. If there's something wrong, I'm gonna know about it, they're gonna tell me because I live in this great neighborhood. But the truth and reality is, sometimes it's much more like this. And the thing about like any neighborhood that you've gone to, you've seen something like this, like it was not designed this way, right? Like something happened through miscare, neglect, socioeconomic problems, like something caused this to happen every single time. And so I think it's the same way in security, is that like we think we're doing okay, we think everything's all right, and through times of neglect, through times of not caring, we get a little bit more like that. And we also oftentimes think, like for me, security is like, I'm good, man, I got this, right? Like I've been doing this for years, we've never had a problem. It's like I got this guy that's guarding the gates. I mean, look at this dude, like, he doesn't look happy. He looks like he's gonna stop all this stuff. But security is oftentimes a lot more like this. I mean, I don't know what the point of that little guard gate is, and neither do, who do you think it is that's like bypassing this? It's like your own employees, right? It's like, I love this. It really illustrates, like sometimes we design all of this, like what we think is awesome stuff, and our employees, whoop, right around it. Great example. Let's say you have, some lockdown file sharing stuff, and your employees just use Dropbox, and they just share out some Excel spreadsheet, and it's got socials in it, or PII of some kind, and you have no idea, right? Like, and it's not that your employees most of the time are like super malicious and trying to bypass, like they're just trying to get through work. And employees, I tell people this all the time, when security people are like, man, security, like they always bypass it. I'm like, yeah, because they're like water. Water always finds the path of least resistance, always. And your employees will do the same. And so when we're designing security, we have to have this balance of how do I design it in such a way that doesn't cause resistance, but also gains me security? And that's not always easy, I understand. And I don't always have the answer to all that either. Or like this movie, right? We're just getting out of the Halloween season, right? I love this, remember the call is coming from inside the house, right? She's like, oh no. Then it all starts. It's often like that. It's our own employees, right? From inside the house. It's the phishing attacks. It's the stuff they open, it's the malvertising links, it's the websites they visit, it's all of those things where, yes, I realize there are attacks, like if you saw the Microsoft Hackingham attacks that happened this year, where like literally out of the blue, a bad guy can exploit an Exchange server, but 99% of the attacks we face that lead to like these big ransomware events are not like that. They're commodity stuff that happened from a user doing something he should do. The insurance guy I gave you an example of before, started from a phishing attack. And it's crazy to me that we're like in 2021 getting ready to be the next year and phishing is still like the #1 threat. The other problem we have is the misconception that our own clients have that security and cybersecurity is like this, like it was in the 90s. Like it was when I was a kid and I never paid lunch money because I owned the system that they used that was running on Novell NetWare, and it was not trivial. It was not hard. It was very, very trivial. It was simple to do it. Like I kid you not, for 2 years in school, I had like $2,000 in my lunch account. And I was buying everyone ice cream, and I was selling internet access because they stored the lunch images as the last 4 of your social, and that was also the proxy password back then. Just four numbers for your password. So I would recognize someone's picture, and I would sell it out to my friends that wanted to get online with someone else's account. Like. That was the old day in the 90s. Like, you don't have to be smart to do crap. It was easy. And people still think it's that way. They think it's like this. But there's 2 problems with this image. You ready? Problem number 1 is it's not like that anymore. Right? It's not a kid in the basement or in his bedroom. It's sophisticated, organized crime. At least the financially driven stuff is. The state secret, state-sponsored stuff that's going after intellectual property is run by foreign governments. Or you could even say our government does the same thing. It's totally different. Now, you know the second reason we know this is false? There is a girl in his bedroom watching him hack. That does not happen, trust me, I tried it. And there are 0 girls that are like, yeah, that sounds awesome. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Okay, we talked about phishing. We know that's like the #1 issue. Okay, so I live in Tampa. I'm sure you guys are like Patrick Mahomes fans or whatever. Here's the thing. There's a lot I could say to you given what happened last year, but it's all sports ball to me, so I really don't care. So you can like rib me all you want. It's sports ball. But I do know this. Look at young Tom winning his first Super Bowl trophy. Like, he's happy. Like, this is a life-changing event. He's now in an elite group of people, and like look at him, especially that image on the far left and far right. Like, oh, he's so like, you want to be him, right? But you guys know the term Florida man? Does anyone know the term Florida man? Those of you who don't, let me just do you a favor. Tonight, just search Florida man, and you're gonna have a lot of fun. There are entire websites devoted to like Florida man. I'll give you my favorite Florida man. Florida man arrested for practicing roundhouse kicks on swans at the park. Like, there's probably a lot of meth that goes into that. But that's classic Florida man. And here's the thing about Florida man. Take it from a Florida man. You live there long enough and it infects you. And let me show you even Tom himself being affected by Florida man. I hit the button, there we go. This may take a second to load. We're gonna hope and pray the video actually plays. So we'll wait just a second. While we're waiting, so we'll see if it'll play. Tampa does not do parades on streets. We do it on the river. So like everyone comes out to the river walk and you watch the whole thing there. And so that's how we do all kinds of parades. And so they did a parade for the Super Bowl on the river, and unfortunately it looks like it doesn't want to play. That's really sad. But what happens is, and you might have seen the video because it was like super famous for a while, he actually chucks the Super Bowl, the trophy, across the water to the next boat over, and none other than Gronkowski catches it. And I'm like, look, if you gotta throw the Lombardi trophy, at least throw it to like a guy like Gronkowski, right? So he like reaches up and he grabs it. But you can even see his daughter. I wish this would play, because his daughter like jumps at him. And she's like, no, Dad, don't do it, don't do it. And it's hilarious. So it probably isn't gonna play, no big deal. But my point is, we can often be like Tom, right? Like we care, and then over time we care less, and we care less, and we care less, and then we chuck the proverbial Lombardi trophy at somebody, right? So let's not be that. And there are ways that we cannot be that. One of those is to recognize you're a target. And this is true for everybody. I see ransomed organizations of all sizes. I've seen even small little healthcare clinics get hit by this stuff. Bad guys don't care. Like, they say they care. Like, if you look at the new Black Matter, or I think they're called Black Matter, they're like, hey, we're not going after healthcare, we're not going after nonprofits, but like, if you're a bank, you're done for. That's what they say. We'll see if it's true. And we do know other things about ransomware, like, for example, have you guys noticed, I don't know if you've seen this or not, but a lot of ransomware variants, especially Eastern European ones, they actually look for Cyrillic keyboard layouts. You know, like Russian characters. Want to know why? If it sees the keyboard has a layout for Cyrillic, it will not run. You tell me why that is. I'll tell you why I think that is. Because the last thing these Eastern European ransomware actors want to do is go breach someone too close to home, because their own governments are aware of what's happening. As long as it's not them, they're okay with it. So they have some amount of like honor among thieves, but certainly not for people like you and me, right? For sure. And I can tell you more and more stories about that. I know one of my friends is, he's not an FBI agent anymore, but he was, and he was the one that took down the Guccifer 2.0 threat actor. And he has the most incredible story of how they found him, they caught him, he lived in Italy at the time, and they were able to extradite him back home. And when they were coming up on him, he said, so he was walking, it was him, his daughter, and his girlfriend walking out of their flat, And he said, me and 3 other buddies were coming up this way. 2 of us came up from behind, and we had some Italian authorities with us. So he said the second he saw all of us, he just stopped, he leaned down, he kissed his daughter, and he walked over to us, and we cuffed him and put him in the car, and that was the end of it. And he's like, it was this surreal moment for me, because we were going after him all this time, and here's this guy like a family man in his mind, with his daughter, walking her to school. Not unlike what you and I would do, and yet the way he does it and the way he generates his revenue and income is totally off our backs. Oh, and he did say F the USA. He did have that to say as well. So this is what we face. The reason it's so systemic, and we've seen so much of it, is because the way ransomware works today is much different than the way it used to work. I call it a cybercrime supply chain. What I mean by that is you have those that write the malware, and then they hand that off to affiliates. And they actually recruit affiliates. And good affiliates are hard to find, and they're the ones that get really good payouts. And the way it works is the affiliates do all the dirty work, and when someone pays the ransom, it goes to the actor, the person who creates the malware, and then they get a cut of it. And so that's why they can afford to operate at such size and scale, is because they're constantly recruiting affiliate groups who do all the dirty work. And instead of it just being, hey, I wrote my malware and I'm going to try to deploy it, they're like, no, I'm good at writing malware. That's what I do. It's all I do. And I'll just take the cuts from all the dirty work that you do. And then there's even entire groups that buy and sell access. So we watch for this at ConnectWise. We have a cyber research unit, and this is what they do. So we watch all the chatter, that sort of thing. And we will notify companies when we see someone accessing and brokering services. So maybe they breached an open RDP, remote desktop protocol. And they'll say, hey, this is for sale, we want X amount of money for it, and some threat actor will purchase it and use that as the entry point. So these are the things that we're stacked up against. That's kind of what makes it hard and difficult for us in this day. So let's move on a little bit, now that you're kind of getting a picture. Does anyone know this guy, or seen him before? And he is a tool bag of tool bags. Remember I told you my #1 punchable face? Tell me you would not want to punch that guy, just looking at him alone. Who wouldn't punch that guy? So this is one of the founders and creators of a malware group called Sodinokibi. They just shut down recently, but you'll see them back up again. They actually have announced they're coming back. He owns not 1 camo-wrapped Lamborghini, he owns 5. He drives them all around in his hometown in Russia. His father is an FSB agent, so don't tell me that they don't know what he's doing. No big deal. I mean, he's even talking to some kind of traffic cop of some kind, right? So this is what we're after, and I show this image just to me, it's a gut check. To me, it's like, it really hurts to see he's got 5 of these Lambos stolen from people like you and me, stolen from small businesses. And I wish I could just put him in front of these small businesses that are literally in tears because they don't have 401ks. They don't have I've been working at the company forever. Like, I'm building this company, it's my life thing, and I'm gonna sell it to my kids one day when I'm done. And then to see it come crashing down from a ransomware attack is the worst thing that they could possibly imagine. It's a horrible situation. And that's what he does with it. He goes and buys Lambos. He's got 5 now. So that's my point. I just wanted you to see the reality of how nasty all that is. So let's talk a little bit more, now that we're kind of done with the landscape of where we're at. Let's talk about where good cybersecurity, maturity comes from. And I call it cyber resilience. This is actually a term that NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, have created. And it's actually the parent umbrella of which cybersecurity belongs underneath. So we talk about cybersecurity a lot, but cyber resilience is actually the genesis of what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about this for a minute. This is the most wordy slide I have for you today, so sorry about that, but I guess I had to have one that was wordy. And I'm only going to go over this first definition. This is literally copy pasta from NIST in 800-160. So if you're a nerd like me and actually want to read it, you can. It's right there. So let me talk about it. The first thing it talks about is it's a measure. And I love the word measure because measure is like, how do I measure up? Maybe how I measure up to my peers. Measuring can also be like, how do I measure myself now from a year ago? Maybe I'm worse, maybe I'm better. Remember the whole home analogy that we shared? So it's a measure of this. I love this. Your organization's, look at this, ability to continuously operate and deliver despite adverse conditions. This is such an intelligently written description. Let me unpack this a little bit for you to help. So, first things first, you notice it has the whole, it's not a question of if, but why mentality baked into this. That philosophy that we talk about, you've heard it before, I know everyone has. This question is not a question of if, it's a question of when. We say that a lot, and it's true. That's not a defeatist mentality, it's a realist mentality. And that's like the first thing we gotta like really understand is this is what realists approach with security. It's going to happen to us. It's gonna happen to it has happened to my company. You can go Google and see how it happened to my company. So it happens to all of us. The last person I am is sitting up here, or standing, and telling you to the masses, this is how it happens, but not me. I've been in those shoes. So just know I'm brothers in arms with you, right? But then what it really talks about is how do we continuously operate under those adverse conditions? That is where the value comes from. Let me give you an example. So at my bank, any banks in here? No banks? Oh, there's a couple banks in the back. Okay, you guys still do pandemic planning? Probably, like my bank, we did pandemic planning every year, and we usually chose like Black Friday. I'm sure you guys probably did the same thing. I always laugh, like, why are we doing this? And then sure enough, this thing called COVID comes around, right? And what we would do, and they could attest to the same thing in the back, is we would pick a branch, and we'd say, hey, for the next 2 hours, you're offline. We're not using our core. No computers. We're gonna do everything on paper. And it's gonna hurt. We're not gonna be as efficient, and we'll reconcile later. But we want to make sure that we can operate without having computers, because what happens if we don't have computers? And so I'm not saying that we're efficient, but I'm saying we can get the job done. Does that make sense? That's an example of cyber resilience. Like literally game planning in your company to say, what would happen? First of all, what are our most critical applications? What are our most critical processes? And if those are offline, what are we going to do about it? What's the backup plan? The reason people pay ransomware, the number one reason why they pay is it's a business decision. They just look at it and they say, we are so offline and we are nowhere near this measure of being able to continuously operate, so we gotta pay the ransom to get back to business. See, ransomware is not the threat, ransomware is the outcome of the threat. And that outcome is the bad guy thinking, how do I push pain on you to force you to pay? And this is why if you look at the evolution of ransomware, many of you probably know this, it's not just standard ransomware anymore. We've been predicting this for 2.5 years now, and we see this standard operating procedure now. It's also data exfiltration. And the reason they do data exfiltration, in other words, they steal all of your data as well, is they know, hey, we're getting better at recovering from backups. We finally learned how important that stuff is. And so if I can recover from backups, then I can get out of the pain you're pushing me. And so the next level of pain, they say, is that if you're not going to pay, then we're going to leak all your data. And the reason they know that pushes pain is because, remember we said before, all the state breach notification laws that we have, that is a really, really difficult situation. And if there's one reason why ransomware attacks are so expensive, that's actually why. It's the data exfiltration challenges. Because if I can't answer forensically what happened, when it happened, who was impacted, the scope, the time, I have to treat all my data as if it were impacted. And that's a big, big, big deal in terms of the cost, right? And so these are the challenges that we have today. And so cyber resilience is not solving this, it's addressing it. It's giving you a framework or a rubric to start saying, okay, I gotta start having conversations. You don't buy your way out of this. This is not solved by a vendor. This is solved by best practice. This is solved by conversations. This is solved by really walking down a mature security journey. And this may help you as well. So when I was a kid, I loved to do mazes, and I would buy those workbooks that had like the really big complex mazes. And I learned like I could go so far from the front, and then I was like, hey, if I start in the end and work my way backward, I can finish the maze quicker. And this is very similar. So this comes from my friends at Optiv, and I love this. So this is like measuring capacity outcomes and where our gaps and challenges lie. And you actually work this maze from reverse. So first of all, just like in IT, security is the same in that it's not just technology. We often talk about technology, but we neglect that there's two equal parts to this, which is people and process. And if you just want to across the board, just lay them out, that's 33% and 33%, right? And so we can actually take this and look at where our challenges are, and I would encourage you to do this in your own company. Like you can screenshot this and then go back and ask your teams, hey, where do we really struggle? Like let's pick some capacity outcomes that we're struggling with right now. And then we can work that backward. Let me give you an example. You see shelfware on there? So shelfware exists when you have really great technology. Maybe it's Gartner leading quadrant and all that stuff. But we have no people and we have no process. That's when we run into shelfware. And so we can pick these and really look through them, or burden to scale, right? We've got most of us don't have this problem, by the way. But maybe Bank of America does, right? Lots of people, lots of process, but no good technology to really run it. So you can pick these and really work through a conversation to start unpacking where some of your challenges might be. And I think that's a pretty helpful thought exercise. But we can do more than that. We can actually begin a framework-aligned conversation as well. How many of you guys are familiar with security frameworks? Those of you are, someone yell one out for me. CIS. Yep, the CIS controls, top 18. Used to be 20, now it's 18. Europe has a bunch of these. We're starting to see some of these even come out like in CMMC for like DoD manufacturers, right? Some of these that are out there. So there's a lot of frameworks. The frameworks don't compete with each other, they complement each other. They're each trying to do different things. And we're not going to talk too deeply about them. I just want you to know about them and to use the CSF, for example. So one reason I like this one is it's by the federal government. It's by NIST. They've literally put thousands of people hours into creating this. So it's just like building a house. Like I don't just start, putting bricks up and then maybe put the footers in and then maybe the gutters and then a roof. This is not how you build a house. You follow blueprints. And security should be the same way. If you find your security approach like you're just chucking stuff at a wall or asking friends what they're doing and you do it too, you're not following a blueprint. And that gets you nowhere. That gets you into all the challenges of the capacity outcomes that we mentioned earlier. So here's how I want you to think about this. If you haven't seen the CSF before, it's 5 domains. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And I want you to think about this in a new way, if you've seen this before. Just for now, bear with me, I want you to think of this as a journey of maturity, starting with identify and moving through into recovery. So you begin your journey in identify. Now I know that's not quite true, but this is going to help you for a minute. So identify is things like, what kind of assets do I have in my network? What kind of software do I have? Who are my actual users versus those that should be disabled? What kind of vulnerabilities might I have? And prevention, you know what prevention is, things like firewalls, things like AV, spam controls, all that kind of stuff, right? And the reason that I notice so many organizations do a good job or a decent job at identify and protect is, if I can get this to go, there we go, is it's very technology dependent and very automated. Let me give you an example, firewall. I set up my rules, set up my routes, set up my threat intel, and off it goes. Very rarely do I have to worry about the firewall. How many firewalls are involved in a breach? All of them. Like almost every company has a firewall. And I'm not saying firewalls are useless. I'm just saying it should cause you to say, yeah, okay, so definitely a firewall is one control is not enough, right? And you know that. That's not rocket science. But typically, identify and protect, those fields are, for the most part, very, very, very technology driven. And when you start getting into detection, let alone response and recovery, it becomes much more people driven. There's a lot more people that go into this. And I see this all the time. I'll give you examples of this. So first of all, think about this. When does the incident occur? The incident does not occur. I had auditors ask me all the time. They'd be like, Wes, show me how many port scans you get on your firewall. I'm like, okay, I can do that. But I'm not doing anything about it because my firewall and my IPS are blocking them. They're doing what they should. What I need to be concerned about is what are the incidents that I'm having? And incidents occur, which I'm calling boom, are when your prevention defenses fail. What we always know in every breach, 100% of the time, is there was some prevention or multiple prevention tools that failed. We know this. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how life is. And prevention can be all kinds of things, even like people being trained to not click on something, and yet they still do. Right? So we know this. So if the boom begins when prevention leaves off, then the question we need to ask ourselves is, what are we doing in the world of detection? Do we detect that thing? Are we aware of that thing that happened? Remember the insurance guy I mentioned before, 30 days. He would tell you, if I brought him up on stage, he'd say, my greatest regret is I had 30 days to do something about it. I had 30 days when the boom began, and I had no idea. None whatsoever. And that led to the problems that he had. So this is where we start thinking about how all this works. And I don't want to get too technical with you, but I love the cyber kill chain. Lockheed Martin invented this, and just sort of describes how an attack happens. And what's really interesting about this is the boom does not begin at the beginning of the attack lifecycle. Bad guys are busy doing reconnaissance, what's out there. They're busy trying to figure out how to weaponize things, like what kind of vulnerabilities exist and how might I use that to my own advantage. But the boom begins in this exploitation phase. To use phishing as an example, I've crafted an email. That email has a PDF in it, or maybe a Word doc that has a macro in it, something like that, and I'm enticing you to click. But until you click, nothing happens. But once you open that and you execute it and whatever, we go into that exploitation phase, now the boom has begun. If we overlay this on top of the CSF, notice this is when detection becomes important. And if we don't detect, then we can't respond. If we don't respond, then we can't recover. See how this is all a systemic problem for us? Like one thing leads to another, leads to the next. And this is why breaches happen. And when you think about, it's not just the exploitation part that you see at the bottom. This is the other thing too. It's not like the movies. Remember like in The Net when Sandra Bullock uploads the virus? And it's like, zzz, boom, virus. Right? Like it doesn't work, like in most cases, it doesn't work that way. Bad guys have to learn your network. They have to figure out, hey, how do I escalate privileges? How do I establish persistence? How do I know what's where and ultimately have the administrative authority to run ransomware? It takes them some time to do that. And so we have all of these opportunities over here on the right to do something about it. Okay, so let's move on. Now that you kind of understand that little piece, maybe. Okay, so here's a good question you can ask yourself. How would we know we're under those adverse conditions until it's too late? There are two ways you'll find out. Number one, you'll find some anomalous something, and you'll say, well, that's weird. I'm going to dive into that, and you take action before something bad happens, like cutting the head off a snake. The other way you find out is you get ransomware, you get business email compromise, you have a $200,000 wire show up, and it's too late to do anything about it. Those are the two ways. One of my mentors was a CISO at 2 Fortune 500s. He said this one time on stage in front of 2,000 people. He said, I've learned the best way to get my board to care about security is to have a breach. He goes, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. It's worked for me twice in a row. I love his transparency and his honesty. But hopefully we can avoid that. So that's the question you need to ask yourself. How do we know we're under those adverse conditions? There's a lot of opportunity we have here. Oh, and this also speaks to this as well. I love the Verizon DBIR. Does anyone read that, the Data Breach Incident Response Report? Any other nerds in here that like this? It's free report. Download it. It comes out every year. So they have one of the largest and most sophisticated incident response teams in the world. So they handle a lot of incidents, a lot of the aftermath. And they produce a report every year looking at the data from the aftermath. And then one of the things they tracked for years, and I think it's so helpful, is what they call the cyber detection gap. And what they mean by that is what's the gap of time from when the boom occurred, the incident began, and we actually detected it. And look at this, for SMBs, and by the way, enterprise I think is at 50%, so even slightly higher. But SMBs, 47% can detect a breach within days or less. Many are 20% are months, and some around 10% are years. I don't even understand that. So that's what we're stacked up against. We still have a very large detection gap in which bad guys can do whatever they want. So I'm hoping this encourages you, not discourages you. Because oftentimes, like we cyber nerds will do all the scare tactics. You're like, oh, there's nothing I can do about this. And by and large, there is something you can do about this. There's a lot you can do. So let's talk about and I'm getting almost done here. Let's talk about some paradigms that we often hear. So one paradigm we hear is this right here. Well, attackers, they have all the advantages. They only have to be right once. Remember we said they're operating out of like Ukraine, North Korea, Vietnam, Syria, these kinds of places. We have no extradition authority at all. We have no ability to go after these people. We have their governments look the other way, so they have literally zero challenges. They can just try and try and try, and they only have to be right once. And I have to be right every time. That is true before the boom. After the boom, and this is a key point for us, that entire paradigm 180s on us. All I need as a defender is one sign of something odd to dive in and say, that's not right, I'm going to take a look and do something. That paradigm shifts. Let me give you examples. Let's say I see PowerShell connect outbound via what's called a web invoke request. Is that malicious? Probably, but maybe not. Maybe not. We should look at it. No firewall is going to see that and do something about it. Another example, let's say you have a user log in from Uzbekistan. We actually had this happen for one of our clients, and we were sure it was malicious. We passed it on to them, and they wrote us back and said, hey, that actually is legitimate. They are adopting their first child from Uzbekistan. We're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And he's like, but thank you for noticing. That's why I use that example. Could it be malicious? Maybe, maybe not, but it's definitely something we want to look at. Another example. This one costs us a lot of time, but it's worth it, is email forwarding rules. Why is that important? It's used to steal data. Not all forwarding rules, right? But if I ever see forwarding rules that's setting up all email that comes into an inbox and is going out to like Russia, Putin at Russia.ru, I know that's malicious. And that's how business email compromise happens, by the way. They get access to email, they do a forwarding rule, they're constantly monitoring and they're waiting for the right opportunity. That's how it happens, right? And so my point is there are many, 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 many things that we can look at to say, well, that's not right. I'm going to take a look. But what is the challenge for us? Remember we said this before? Detection and response and recovery are hard because they're not automated things. They require somebody to take a peek and say, is this real? Is this not? What will we do about it? What's our incident response plans? How do we handle it? There's a lot of stuff baked into that, and we don't typically spend time on that. So I'm going to skip by for sake of time the rest of these, but I have a couple others that may or may not choose to show up. This little clicker, let me get, there we go. Okay, so you can take a peek at those, but what I'm trying to get across here is if we're only relying on prevention tools and we have no people and process in place, remember we talked about that, technology, people, process, we are going to fail. We're setting ourselves up for failure. That's the challenge we're in. And your advantage is home field. So I actually looked this up because I told you I'm a dweeb. Did you know there is scientific evidence of home field advantage? They looked at English Premier League teams. There is, and I know this is small, but the study showed out of like many thousands of games, it was like a 1/60th advantage. Like out of 60 games, the average was one extra win playing at home or something like that. And there's a bunch of other studies that correlate the same thing. There is a truth to home field advantage. And in cybersecurity, same thing. You should know your network better than a bad guy knows your network. And it's that way. It takes them time to learn what's there and what to do and what is where. And there are many things you can introduce into your network to make it more difficult to give you opportunity to detect. Let me give you examples. Things like network segmentation. This is something that unfortunately is on CIS Group 2, which is like the intermediate level of control. I wish they'd move it to 1. It takes time to do network segmentation. I'm telling you, my friends, that is a big, big deal. Another example would be introducing in deception. You've ever seen like things like honeypots, canaries? These are things that we can introduce into our network that no legitimate thing should ever touch or scan or see or use. And the second it gets tipped off, that's my way of saying, well, that's weird. Looking at our Office 365 Google Apps data. It's usually ignored completely, and there's critical data in there, especially login data, all of that kind of stuff that needs to be seen and reviewed. So take advantage of your home field. You have the advantage of knowing your network better than the bad guy does. So seize on that and put those things in place because it'll go a really long way. Okay, let's move on because I think I'm about done here. I want to give a low-tech way to kind of explain all of this because I think this will help as well. And if you ever struggle with talking to like senior management, the board, non-technical people about what we're trying to do, think about it this way. So we've talked about prevention is awesome. You need it in place. It blocks the vast majority of nasty stuff, but at some point prevention fails, and that's where detection picks up. So detection is all focused on, I don't know if it's malicious. I'm just saying it's abnormal. I'm just saying we need to take a peek at it because we don't normally see X, Y, Z, right? So think about it this way. Think about your home once this comes up. In your house, you guys lock the doors at night? You lock the doors like when you used to go to work? Like, I do that. But I don't, never, ever have I locked my doors expecting it to keep a bad guy out. You know why I lock the doors? To keep my neighbor kid out. Because he just walks in. That's what he does. You guys know, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? So if I lock the doors, I know when I'm gone, I know he's not walking into the house. So when I think about a bad guy, it's not like he's going to walk up, he's going to jiggle the door handle and be like, shucks, fooled again or foiled again and walk out. No, he can throw a brick in the window. He'll use bump keys and get in. He'll Santa style down my chimney. Yes, I have a chimney in Tampa. I don't understand why. I have never turned, I kid you not, in 3 years I've never turned the heat on in my house, never. And all the other Floridians are like, are you kidding? It gets so cold, it gets down to 50. I'm like, yeah. Not turning the heat on. There's no need. They're blown away by it. So anyway, we know a bad guy is those locks are not going to stop them. So what do? Because we operate under the assumption that locks at some point will fail, I put in a home alarm system. And no one gets mad at their home alarm system when a bad guy gets into the house. The purpose of the alarm system is to tell me when the bad guy gets into the house. That's the whole point of the alarm system. And so you guys know where I'm going with this already, right? So I'm saying, what are we introducing that gives us the capability to detect, respond, and recover in our networks? That's the question. And it's not just vendors. It's not just technology. It's not just dollars that you spend. It's people and it's process. These are the things that we desperately lack. So if you want to see examples of what all this can be, for the nerds that are here, a bunch of that stuff. And I'm not going to talk about all that today, but these are standard detection, response, and recovery people, process, and technologies that all work together that reduce that detection gap that give us the ability to do something about it. And so I hope you leave this encouraged to say, okay, I got some things to start on. I can start on a framework, start aligning to it. I can start with the right questions about cyber resilience. I can start with the right questions of what are we doing to detect, respond, and recover. And so my big takeaway for you is this. So we did a family vacation a few weeks ago in Colorado. We did the Royal Gorge down in southern Colorado, and it's awesome. It's like a mini Grand Canyon. And what's super cool about it is it's the world's longest foot suspension bridge. Has anyone been on this thing? Was it like a windy day when you went? Yeah, it's like crazy. It's like bouncing in the wind almost. And there's holes in the wood. I peer down, I got a video of it. You can see all the way 300 feet down. I'm standing on top of this piece of wood. It's crazy, but it's awesome. And the story of how they bridged this gap was pretty amazing. Way back in the 20s when they first built the bridge, and I'm convinced the wood is still from the 20s. It's amazing, right? And so my takeaway for you is I want you to think about what are your gaps? And how are you going to bridge those gaps? Every company has gaps, and that is okay. The most important thing is to understand what are those gaps so that I can start to address them, and I can really start to address from the most important onward. And that happens by risk assessing. That happens with framework aligning. It does not happen by calling your friend and saying, well, what are you doing? Or jumping on Reddit and looking what everyone else is doing, or picking what's in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Those are not the ways we do security. That's not scientific. So that's my encouragement to you, is just to spend some time thinking about what your gaps are, because it'll take you a really, really long way in your own security journey. That is all I've got. If you guys want to follow me, I'm on LinkedIn, just Wes Spencer, and also on YouTube, Wes Spencer. Would love for you guys to follow me if you'd like to. And I really, really appreciate it.